My name's Susan Pa. I grew up at this church, and except for a 8-year stint in Texas, I've always gone here. And growing up, I had the childhood that we hope our children will have. I had the teen years that we hope our children will have. Because of my parents, because of this church, because of my life experience, I had this really great life. Not only that, but I was born into a life that is easy, that the world bends in the direction of people like me, that look like me, talk like me, have the socioeconomic status of me. I had a really easy life. But growing up, and as I got older and entered high school and college, when you start thinking about those things, about what am I going to do with my life, I'm now getting to make a lot more choices. This verse in the Bible bothered me. And because I grew up at this church, and because I grew up in the home that I grew up in, I took God's word seriously. And I had a really strong faith at an early age. And this is the verse that bothered me, that I really struggled with. Jesus is talking to his disciples, to the people that follow him. He says, "If any of you wants to be my followers, you must turn from your selfish ways and take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you'll save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" And I struggled with that, because who would want to give up the life I had? In all the ways that mattered, I had a great life. And this is what I found. There's a story in the Bible, right, where this man comes to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, what do I have to do to follow you?" And Jesus said, "Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." And the second one is a lot like the first one: love your neighbor as yourself. And so for me, I pursued a career and a life of trying to love people like I was going to love myself. And what that meant for me was beginning the journey of becoming a foster and adoptive parent, so I could give the life to a child that I had, that I was fortunate enough to be given. And so if you know our family, you know that we have an older son, Khalil, who's now an adult. When he was 15 and I was 28, my husband and I became his parents. And when you're 28 and you become the parent for the first time of a 15-year-old, you're acutely aware that you do not know what you're doing. And for the first time in my life, I had to rely on God's supernatural intervention to give me what I needed. For the first time in my life, the life that I had been given, that I'd been given by God, and I knew I'd been given by God, but I needed God to supernaturally show up in ways that I did not have the resources for. And as we were raising our son, I often thought of the story of the talents. And for those of you that are familiar, Jesus often told stories like parables to illustrate a point about God, or about God's character. And so he tells this story. He tells a story of this boss that gives 3 people talents. They're like investments, right? So one guy gets 10, one guy gets 5, and the other guy gets 1. And he says, go and invest it, double it, all this kind of thing. So the guy with 10 talents comes back with 10 more, so he's brought 20. The guy with 5 comes back with 5 more, so he doubled it. And the guy with 1 comes back and he says, "I know you're a tough taskmaster, and I didn't want to disappoint you, so I just buried it." And I always kind of, as a kid, I heard that story, and I kind of had a hard time with it, because I was like, I grew up in a home where you're taught to save your money, these kind of things, be careful with your investment. So, and the boss is like really upset. He says, "You wicked person, go give it to someone else that's going to do something with it." And for the first time with our son Cleo, I realized that the life I'd been given, that the talents I'd been given were not just for me, that they weren't just for me to sit on my talent and bury it. It was to give it away to someone else. That this wasn't just for my life, for my benefit, for my family, for my children. This is to give to other people. And the sin in that story is not that he wasn't doubling it. The sin was that he wasn't willing to risk anything, to do anything with it. And I often thought, I don't know if I'm a 10-talent person or a 5-talent person, but I think what God is asking, or 1-talent person, but what God is asking for me is to do something with that talent, to risk losing my life, to risk losing the safety and what I've been given, and just give it away. When I was in college, I went to a Christian college, so I took Bible classes. And one of our teachers told the story of Peter and Jesus saying, Peter, do you love me? That story of where he asked 3 times. And first time, I'd never heard this before. But he says, when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And he asked him 3 different times, and Peter says, yes, Lord, I love you. But what our Bible teachers told us is that the word that Jesus was using for love was a broader, more expansive, more passionate love than the love that Peter was responding with. Peter was responding with a Greek word that meant a lesser love, or Hebrew word, whatever Jesus and Peter spoke to each other. I don't know. I'm not a theologian. But and our Bible teacher said this. He said, just give Jesus what you have. Just give him what you have. And that really struck me. Sometimes I think that I need to be more or better before I step out and do something. And what I realized in that moment is that just give people what we have. Give the little that we have to Jesus. And that it might just change the world, because that's what Peter did. So in January 2017, so just last year, my husband and I began our foster care journey. So I grew up at this church, like I said, and because of this church, I had a dream to become a foster parent. Because if you grew up here, you know that foster care was a really important part of our church. And so I had always wanted to be a foster parent. And so we got to realize that dream. And I can tell you, I could talk about that. That's its own separate talk, if you want to hear about it. But to summarize, I'll tell you it was awesome, and it was hard, but it was mostly just awesome. And the story that I wanted was that we would have these boys, and we did. We had them for 15 months. And before I started this journey, I said, God, do not give me children that we're just going to have for a long time and then let them leave. If we're going to have them for a long time, let us keep them. If we're not going to get to keep them, then let them stay for a few months and have them go. But that was not the story we had if you saw us in the church hallways. Some of you thought that they were ours. So the story I wanted and the story I had was very different. The story that I got was that we had our boys for 15 months. And then exactly 15 months to the day, we had a court date. And they decided to give them to their aunt and uncle. And I didn't go. My husband sat in there, but I couldn't because I knew what was going to happen. And shortly after that court date, Stephanie Viverberg sent me a text. Stephanie's already been mentioned, right? We're only on our 3rd retreat speaker, and she's being mentioned twice. So Stephanie shows up for people. And if you choose to foster, and I'm not going to lie, I'm going to tell you some of you need to. Some of you need to show up for our kids, because a lot of us in this room have been given a lot of things, and you need to give it away. And maybe that's not fostering, maybe that's not adopting, but show up for the people in your life, and show up for people that you may not even know yet that need a blessing. But if you choose to foster at this church, I will tell you that you will have an army of people that surround you. And Stephanie Viverberg was one of our generals. And she sent me this text shortly after the court date. She said, "You are moving mountains with your faith, but I sometimes forget that mountains are big and move slowly, and that we only get to see parts of the whole journey of faith and love." I'll read that again. "You're moving mountains with your faith, but I sometimes forget that mountains are big and move slowly, and that we only get to see parts of the whole journey of faith and love." And I thought that was really deep and really good. I'm going to save it. I need to think about it. Because when you're sad, your brain just doesn't work as well. So sometimes you have to ponder things a little bit longer. And after that text, I went and read the story that she was referring to about the mountain moving. And this is Matthew 17:20. Jesus says, "You don't have enough faith." He's talking to his disciples. "I tell you the truth. If you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it would move. Nothing would be impossible." I tell you the truth. If you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. And I used to think before this summer, before the court date, before Stephanie's text, that story was about a mountain moving. That's how I always read that story. And I went back and read it again, and it has nothing to do with the mountain. The subject of the sentence, the point of the paragraph that Jesus is talking about is our faith. And for the first time, I realized that it's not about the mountain moving, it's about me moving. It's about letting God move my faith. Because I'll tell you, after this, after fostering, my husband and I looked at each other and we said, we're never doing this again. Why would I do this again? Why would I keep losing my life only to invite loss and pain on purpose? Why would I do that? Why would I sit through and watch a system that is unjust? We watched a lot of things that just made me angry. And I came from a world that believed in our court system. And I learned not to believe in it. I learned for the first time what it's like to be really angry at people that are supposed to protect us and protect our children and fail us. And so I had to get used to sitting with anger, and I had to get used to sitting with loss, two things that I really haven't had to deal a lot with. I had to get used to losing my life. But this talk is about the movement of faith. And I'll tell you, after a couple weeks of past the court date, my husband said to me at dinner one night, he said, so I'm thinking I might want to foster again. And with a wobbly yes, I said, I am too. Because we gained the whole world. We lost our lives, but we got to gain the whole world. Because I can tell you, God has been with me in this journey. And not just while we had our boys, but after it, I really feel God's guidance and God's presence. And I can tell you that God is real, and that when he invites you to lose your life, you really do gain the whole world. You really do gain the whole world. So today is our youngest foster guy's birthday. And he's 2 years old today. Yes. If you know Noah, you know that it's not just awesome that he's turning 2. You know that it's not just awesome that it's his birthday. Noah was born with some challenges. And the doctors kept telling me he needs to hit these milestones by 2 or he's going to have to deal with some of these things for the rest of his life. And I can't tell you how special it is to me. And by the grace of God, he's been able to overcome a lot of his challenges. When we got him at 4 months old, we were in the neurologist's office shortly after. And she said, we don't know, he may just be totally special needs and never develop. He may develop normally. We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. And so I can't tell you how special it is to see him be as much as God created him to be, as much as he has the opportunity to be, and to know that I got to be a part of that journey. That I got to be a part of that journey. That giving God a little bit of my faith, a little bit of my courage, allowed me to get to be a part of his victory. And so I'm going to quote Brené Brown. This is a quote that she has about a book that I've been reading. But I'm going to kind of substitute it for our talk. But it says, this is both an invitation and a challenge to bravely show up for ourselves, for the people we love, and for the strangers we will one day call family. I'll read that again. This is both an invitation and a challenge to bravely show up for ourselves. Because how many times do we sit out because we're afraid? How many times are we waiting to not be fearful before we move? To bravely show up for ourselves, for the people we love, and for the strangers we'll one day call family. And I'll never forget our little foster guys, Noah and Adam, coming up that driveway. And I'll be honest, I turned to my husband and I said, they're not very cute. My worst fear is being realized. And then, like a few days in, I'm like, they're so cute. And And I would ask my husband, do you think it's just because I love them now? And he's like, I don't know, probably. I was like, we should ask more people if they think they're cute. But he's like, they're gonna lie to us even if they're not cute. They're not gonna tell us they're not. But that stranger became my family. And he was just a stranger before that day when he showed up at my door. And so I invite you guys to lose your life so that you can gain it. That you'll start loving people like we love ourselves. Because in that we get to welcome God into our life. And the loss that we'll experience, the loss of life that as we know it, I promise you, as someone that's living it, and as someone who said, God, please don't let this happen, and he let it happen, I've gained the whole world, and I'm doing it again. Because it's worth it. Because those kids are worth it. And because the life that I've gotten to gain by doing it is worth it. So if you're sitting there and you came back from your break, you saw that you now have a plastic bag. If you're not a farmer and you're not a cook, like me, I am neither, I will identify those things in your bag. They are mustard seeds. And so I'd ask that you open up your bag and you take one of your mustard seeds, or two, it might be hard to pick up just one, and put them in your hand. I'd ask that you hold it like this. And we're gonna say a prayer and we're gonna offer this to God. When I first saw the mustard seed a few years ago, I was a little disappointed because it's very small. And I thought, God doesn't think much of my faith. He's not asking for much of me. But I'm really grateful for that. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna pray and we're gonna offer this to God. And whether this represents your fear, your faith, your hope, your courage, all of it can be small, and our fear can be big. And all God's asking is that you let him move you, that you start moving. He's in charge of the mountain. We're not moving that mountain with our little bit of faith. That's God's business. But he does ask us to move. And so I'm going to close us out in prayer while we hold this mustard seed in our hand. God, we thank you, Father, that you're bigger than our fear and that you don't require much of our faith. And so we offer what's in our hand to represent our courage that's small, our fear that feels so big, and the hope, God, that you'll do something with what we have to offer, because we know that you move mountains with something as small as what's in our hand. That you, God, are in charge of the story, and that all that you're asking of us is we'll begin the journey with you, that we'll learn what it's like to lose our life because you promise that we'll gain the world. It's in your name we pray, amen. Amen. Thank you, ladies.